Welcome to our deep dive into Horace Walpole.
Yeah,
You sent over a ton of information about him.
I have.
And we're going to unpack it all
Okay.
and hopefully reveal why this son of a prime minister was anything but ordinary.
Okay.
So get ready for a trip back to 18th century England,
All right.
where we'll uncover the man behind the Gothic masterpiece, Strawberry Hill,
Yes.
and the birth of a literary genre that still chills us to the bone today.
It does. What's fascinating about Walpole is that he was really a man of contradictions.
Okay.
I mean, born into this immense privilege,
Yeah.
but somehow drawn to the shadows and the macabre.
Interesting.
He wasn't some brooding figure locked away in a castle, though.
Right.
He was a social butterfly who flitted through the highest circles of society, all while nurturing this deep fascination with the Gothic.
It's like he had this secret life,
Right.
this other side that most people never really glimpsed. But it was this hidden passion that led him to create something truly unique.
It did.
Something that would ripple through the centuries and inspire countless artists and writers.
Right, and that's what we're going to explore.
Yeah.
We'll delve into his family dynamics,
Okay.
his unconventional relationships,
Right.
and his really audacious decision to build this Gothic castle
Right.
in a world obsessed with, neoclassical order and reason.
So it all begins with a simple villa in Twickenham.
Yeah.
It's kind of blank canvas
Yeah,
upon which Horace Walpole would paint his Gothic dreams.
it's true.
So let's start with the man himself.
Okay.
You've highlighted some interesting details
Right.
about his upbringing and his relationship with his father,
Mm-hmm.
Robert Walpole, Britain's first prime minister.
Yes, Horace was born into a world of power and politics,
Yeah.
but it does seem like his relationship with his father was quite strained.
Okay.
He was much closer to his mother, Catherine, and was just devastated by her early death. His father, on the other hand, remarried within 6 months,
Oh, geez.
a move that likely left young Horace feeling really abandoned and betrayed.
That's got to have a profound impact on a young mind,
Yeah,
especially one as sensitive and imaginative as Horace's.
it does.
It's almost like those early experiences kind of planted the seeds
Right.
for his fascination with these themes of loss, betrayal,
Yeah,
and the weight of family legacies.
absolutely. And these themes are woven throughout his later works,
Yeah.
particularly in the Castle of Otranto,
Wow.
which we'll discuss in more detail later. But
Yeah. Go ahead.
before we jump ahead,
Yeah.
it's important to understand that despite his privileged upbringing,
Right.
Horace wasn't just a spoiled aristocrat.
Okay.
He was surprisingly progressive for his time, criticizing the slave trade,
Wow.
a stance that was quite radical in 18th century England.
Yeah, that is especially interesting when you consider that he inherited these like cushy government jobs,
Right.
these sinecures,
Yes.
that provided him with this comfortable income for minimal work.
Oh, right.
It's like he was acutely aware of the inequalities of his time
It seems that way.
and perhaps felt a twinge of guilt
Yeah.
about his own unearned wealth.
There's definitely a sense of that in his writings.
Right.
He even argued that he would willingly give up those privileges
Wow.
if the public good demanded it, acknowledging that he hadn't truly earned them in the traditional sense.
That's a pretty remarkable statement
Yeah.
for a man of his position.
It is.
It suggests a level of self-awareness
Right.
and social conscience
Yeah.
that was uncommon among the elite of his era.
Yes.
So we have this picture kind of emerging, a man of privilege, grappling with the weight of his inheritance,
Right.
a son haunted by his mother's loss, and a progressive voice in an age of social injustice.
Yeah.
How does this complex individual find solace and expression?
Well, that's where Strawberry Hill comes in.
Right.
This Gothic castle wasn't just a whimsical escape. It was a statement.
It's a rebellion against the prevailing norms of his time.
Yeah. You've highlighted some fascinating articles about the architectural significance of Strawberry Hill.
Yes.
And I'm really eager to dive into that.
Okay.
But before we explore the castle itself,
Yeah.
I'm curious about Horace's early travels.
Okay.
You mentioned he embarked on the Grand Tour,
Yeah.
a rite of passage for young men of his class.
It was.
Did these experiences shape his artistic sensibilities?
Absolutely.
Okay.
His travels through Europe
Yeah.
exposed him to just a wide range of architectural styles, from the classical ruins of Rome
Yeah.
to the grand cathedrals of France.
Okay.
He even traveled with the poet Thomas Gray, but their personalities clash.
Oh.
Gray was all about soaking in the art and the culture,
Yeah.
while Horace was more drawn to the social scene
Right.
and the gossip.
It sounds like a classic odd couple scenario.
It does.
Two friends with completely different perspectives on the world.
Yeah. Did this clash of personalities have any lasting impact on their relationship?
They actually had a falling out in Italy.
Oh, wow.
Fueled in part by their different financial situations.
Oh, really?
Horace, with his inherited wealth, was footing the bill for the trip.
Okay.
Which seems to have created some tension.
Yeah.
But to Horace's credit,
Right.
he always ensured that Gray's expenses were covered, even doing so secretly at times.
Wow.
Despite their differences, they eventually reconciled, their friendship enduring through letters, even when separated by distance.
That speaks volumes about the depth of their bond.
It does.
It also highlights Horace's generosity and loyalty qualities that would become evident in his later relationships as well.
Right.
Speaking of his travels,
Yes.
you mentioned that Horace was particularly drawn to the Gothic architecture he encountered in Europe.
Yes.
Did these early encounters kind of plant the seeds for his later obsession with the Gothic?
Most definitely. He was captivated by the grandeur and the mystery of Gothic cathedrals, by the intricate details and the sense of history embedded in their very stones.
Right.
And remember, this was a time when neoclassical architecture was all the rage, all clean lines and symmetry.
Yeah.
Horace, however, was drawn to the opposite.
Really?
The drama, the shadows.
Interesting.
The beauty found in imperfection and decay.
It's almost as if he was rejecting the cold rationality of neoclassicism, embracing instead the emotional power and the sublime beauty of the Gothic.
Exactly.
But how did this fascination translate into the creation of Strawberry Hill?
Yeah.
Was it simply a matter of replicating what he had seen abroad?
Not at all.
Okay.
Strawberry Hill wasn't a copy of any existing structure. It was a unique creation, a blend of Horace's imagination, his research, and his collaborations with a committee of taste that he assembled to help him realize his vision.
Yeah. You included a fascinating article about this committee of taste and the challenges that Horace faced in bringing his Gothic dream to life.
Yes.
I'm really eager to hear more about that.
Okay.
But before we delve into the construction of Strawberry Hill, I want to touch on a key element of Horace's personality that seems to have fueled his artistic endeavors. His love for the macabre. You mentioned he was a collector of curiosities.
Yes.
Of objects that whispered of the past and hinted at darker realms.
Yes. Horace was fascinated by the grotesque, by the beauty found in the unusual and the unsettling. His collection included medieval armor, ancient relics.
Wow.
And even a lock of hair said to belong to Edward IV.
That's amazing.
It's as if he was curating a museum of the macabre.
Yeah.
A space where the past and the present, beauty and darkness could coexist.
It's like he was intentionally blurring the lines between reality and fantasy, creating a space where the imagination could run wild.
Yes.
And it's within this space, amidst the flickering candlelight and the shadows cast by suits of armor, that the seeds of the Gothic novel would be planted. But that's a story for our next installment.
Okay. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Horace Walpole. As we kind of delve deeper into his story, it becomes clear that Strawberry Hill wasn't just a house. It was an embodiment of his personality, his anxieties, his fascination with the past, and his desire to create something truly unique. And it was within those walls, surrounded by his collection of curiosities, that he penned a tale that would ignite a literary firestorm.
You're talking about The Castle of Otranto, right? The one that's often credited as the first true Gothic novel. You know, it's fascinating to think that a man born into such privilege, a man who hobnobbed with royalty and held a seat in Parliament, would find his most lasting legacy in a genre that embraces the shadows and explores the darker side of human nature.
And that's what makes Walpole so compelling. He wasn't afraid to delve into the macabre to explore themes that polite society often shunned. He was in many ways a rebel disguised in a powdered wig. But before we get to The Castle of Otranto, it's worth noting that Walpole wasn't a one-hit wonder. He wrote quite a bit before that, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He dabbled in satire, art history, even political commentary. In fact, the article you sent about his pamphlet, written from the perspective of a Chinese philosopher, is particularly insightful. It shows how cleverly he used satire to critique the English government and their treatment of Admiral John Byng.
Exactly. By adopting this outsider perspective, he could voice his dissent and highlight the absurdity of the situation without directly attacking the powers that be. It speaks to his wit and his political savvy.
He was clearly a man of many talents, a master of words who could wield them for both amusement and social commentary. But it was the Gothic that truly captured his imagination. And it all seems to have stemmed from a rather vivid dream. You mentioned a giant hand in armor. What was that all about?
Well, that dream became the catalyst for the Castle of Otranto, published in 1764. Now, here's where it gets really intriguing. He initially presented the book as a translation of a medieval Italian manuscript, even going so far as to invent a fake translator and a detailed backstory.
Wait, he tried to pass it off as a genuine historical document? That's audacious. I wonder why he chose that approach. Was he afraid of how the public would react to such a fantastical story?
That's a great question. And there are several possible explanations. Perhaps he felt that by presenting it as a found manuscript, he could lend it an air of authenticity, tapping into the growing fascination with the medieval period that was sweeping Europe at the time. Or maybe he wanted to create a sense of mystery to play with the boundaries between reality and fiction.
It's like he was inviting readers to step into a world where anything was possible, where the line between the real and the supernatural was deliberately blurred. So tell me more about the story itself. What's the Castle of Otranto all about?
Imagine a crumbling castle perched precariously on a cliff, a tyrannical lord haunted by a family curse, a damsel in distress, and then throw in a giant helmet that falls from the sky, a disembodied sword that appears out of thin air, and mysterious prophecies that hint at doom and redemption. It's a wild ride.
It sounds like a recipe for Gothic perfection. And those elements you mentioned, the castle, the tyrannical figure, the damsel in distress, the supernatural occurrences, those would become hallmarks of the genre, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. Walpole essentially laid the groundwork for Gothic literature, creating a blueprint that countless writers would follow. And it's fascinating to see how those elements reflect the anxieties of the time. The tyrannical lord, for example, could be seen as a symbol of the oppressive social structures that were starting to be questioned during the Enlightenment. The damsel in distress, often trapped within the confines of the castle, could represent the limited agency of women in 18th century society. And the supernatural occurrences, well, those tap into our primal fears, the things that lurk in the shadows of our minds, the unknown that both terrifies and fascinates us.
So it wasn't just a spooky tale meant to entertain. It was a reflection of the cultural and social currents of the time, a way of exploring the darker side of human nature and the anxieties that lurked beneath the surface of polite society.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that The Castle of Otranto was published during a time when the novel was still a relatively new art form. Walpole's work helped to shape the direction of fiction, paving the way for writers like Anne Radcliffe, the Bronte sisters, and even Mary Shelley with Frankenstein.
It's amazing to think that this one book, born out of a dream and written in a whimsical Gothic castle, would have such a lasting impact on the literary world. It clearly struck a chord with readers tapping into something primal, something that continues to resonate with us centuries later.
And let's not forget the role of Strawberry Hill itself. The atmosphere of that house, the objects he collected, the stories he told within its walls, all of that seems to have seeped into his writing, shaping the very DNA of the Gothic novel.
It's like the castle itself was a character in the story, a silent witness to the creative process. But it wasn't just a private sanctuary. You mentioned that Horace opened Strawberry Hill for tours, allowing the public to experience his Gothic creation firsthand.
He did. It was as if he wanted to share his passion, his obsession with anyone willing to pay a guinea for the experience. He even wrote a meticulous guidebook detailing every nook and cranny, every object in his collection. Some might view this as simply a way to show off his wealth and eccentricity, but I think it was more than that. I think it was his way of inviting the world into his imagination to share his fascination with the past, with the grotesque, with the beautiful, all intertwined in this fantastical setting.
It's like he was saying, this is my world, and I want you to see it, to feel it, to understand what it means to me. And in doing so, he was also challenging the prevailing artistic trends of his time. While the elites were embracing the order and reason of neoclassicism, Horace was celebrating the emotional power of the Gothic, the beauty found in decay and darkness.
Exactly. He was a pioneer, a visionary who dared to embrace the shadows and explore the hidden depths of the human psyche. And in doing so, he created something truly unique. Something that continues to fascinate and inspire us centuries later.
But what about the man behind the Gothic facade?
Yeah.
What was Horace Walpole like in his personal life? You've highlighted some interesting material about his relationships, many of which seem to have been quite unconventional for the time.
That's a fascinating aspect of his life, and one that's often subject to speculation and interpretation. Remember, we're talking about 18th century England, a time when societal norms were quite rigid, especially when it came to matters of sexuality and relationships. Horace never married and had no children. He had several close friendships with men that were the subject of gossip and innuendo. Now it's important to approach these topics with sensitivity and avoid imposing modern interpretations on the past. But it's clear that Horace's personal life was just as complex and intriguing as his artistic creations.
You've included an article about his friendship with Sir Horace Mann, a British diplomat in Italy, which seems to have been particularly close. What can you tell us about that relationship?
They met during Horace's grand tour and maintained a lifelong correspondence even though they never saw each other again after Horace returned to England. Their letters are filled with warmth, affection, and a sense of shared intellectual curiosity. Some scholars have suggested that there might have been romantic feelings between them, but those are just interpretations based on the language and tone of their correspondence. What's undeniable is that their friendship was a source of great comfort and support for Horace throughout his life.
It's a reminder that even in a world defined by rigid social structures, deep and meaningful connections can flourish often in the most unexpected places.
Absolutely. And those connections, those relationships often play a key role in shaping who we are and the art we create. In Horace's case, his unconventional friendships, his love for the macabre, his fascination with the past, all of these threads weave together to create the tapestry of his life and his work.
And speaking of his work, we've explored the genesis of the Castle of Otranto and its impact on the literary world. But what happened to Strawberry Hill after Horace was gone?
Yeah.
Did his Gothic creation fade into obscurity?
That's a question we'll explore in our next installment, along with the legacy of this remarkable man who dared to embrace the shadows and reshape the landscape of literature.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the life and legacy of Horace Walpole. We've journeyed through his privileged upbringing, his rebellious spirit, his creation of Strawberry Hill, and the groundbreaking novel that sparked an entire literary movement. But as with all stories, there comes a final chapter. What became of his beloved Strawberry Hill and the man who dared to challenge the conventions of his time?
Well, as we've discussed, Horace, despite his vast social network and unconventional relationships, never married and had no children, so the question of inheritance becomes a bit of a mystery. Who would inherit this fantastical Gothic castle, this repository of art and curiosities, this testament to a life lived on the fringes of convention?
It's almost like a plot twist in one of his Gothic tales. A castle left without an heir, its fate hanging in the balance. Did it fall into disrepair? Was it swallowed up by the relentless march of time?
Not quite. Horace left Strawberry Hill to his cousin's daughter, Anne Seymour Dahmer, a fascinating figure in her own right. You highlighted some intriguing information about her, noting that she was a talented sculptor who also defied societal expectations.
Another rebel in the Walpole lineage.
Mm-hmm.
It seems challenging convention ran in the family. What can you tell us about Anne? And how did she handle inheriting such a unique and, let's face it, rather eccentric property?
Anne was known for her close relationships with women, which in 18th century England raised more than a few eyebrows. Some even labeled her a sapphist, though it's important to remember that such terms were often used to discredit and marginalize women who didn't conform to societal norms. She was a free spirit, passionate about her art, and seemingly unconcerned with fitting into any mold.
So we have this unconventional woman inheriting this unconventional property. It sounds like a recipe for either disaster or brilliance. What happened? Did she embrace Horace's vision and become the mistress of the Gothic castle?
She was certainly passionate about Strawberry Hill and dedicated considerable time and effort to preserving its unique character. However, her independent nature and her artistic pursuits eventually led her to sell the property. She spent much of her life traveling and honing her craft as a sculptor, leaving a mark on the art world that was distinct from, yet perhaps inspired by her famous relative.
It's as if the spirit of Horace, that desire to break free from convention and pursue one's passions, was woven into the very fabric of Strawberry Hill, influencing even those who inherited it. So the castle changed hands, but it didn't fade into obscurity. What became of it? Does it still stand today?
It does. Strawberry Hill has had several owners over the centuries, but it has been carefully preserved and is now a popular tourist attraction. Visitors can wander through its Gothic halls, admire its collection of art and curiosities, and perhaps even feel a shiver down their spines as they imagine Horace Walpole himself lurking in the shadows.
It's a testament to the enduring power of his vision, the way he took this simple villa and transformed it into something truly unique, something that continues to capture the imagination centuries later. So the castle endures. But what about his literary legacy? We've talked about how the Castle of Otranto ignited the Gothic movement, but did it have staying power? Did it influence writers beyond his immediate circle?
Absolutely. The Castle of Otranto is considered a cornerstone of Gothic literature. It's a must-read for anyone interested in the genre's origins. The themes Walpole explored, the atmosphere he created, the tropes he established, all of these elements resonated with writers who came after him. From the Bronte sisters with their haunting tales of love and loss set against the backdrop of the Yorkshire moors, to Edgar Allan Poe with his chilling explorations of the human psyche, to even contemporary authors who still draw inspiration from the Gothic's enduring power. Walpole's influence can be felt across the literary landscape.
It's remarkable to think that a story born out of a dream written in a whimsical Gothic castle would have such a profound and lasting impact. He tapped into something universal, something that continues to fascinate and terrify us centuries later. That fear of the unknown, the allure of the shadows, the thrill of encountering the things that go bump in the night, it's all there in his work.
And let's not forget his letters. You sent over quite a few articles highlighting their significance. Horace was a prolific correspondent, and his letters provide an unparalleled glimpse into 18th century life. They're witty, insightful, gossipy, and sometimes downright scandalous. They offer a window into the social and political landscape of his time, but they also reveal so much about the man himself.
It's like having a direct line to the past, hearing his voice come alive through his words.
Yeah.
You could sense his passion for art and history, his sharp wit, his keen observations of human nature, and even his struggles with gout and his distrust of doctors. He comes across as a fully formed individual, complex and contradictory, a product of his time, yet somehow also ahead of it.
He was a man who embraced life on his own terms, who challenged conventions, who pursued his passions, and who ultimately left behind a legacy that continues to inspire and intrigue us. His story reminds us that it's okay to be different, to embrace our eccentricities, to explore the shadows, and to create something truly unique.
He was a Gothic pioneer, a literary innovator, a man who dared to build his own castle, both literally and figuratively. And in doing so, he left an indelible mark on the world, a mark that continues to resonate centuries later.
So if you find yourself drawn to the allure of the Gothic, if you're fascinated by the interplay of light and shadow, if you appreciate those who dare to defy convention, then I encourage you to delve deeper into the world of Horace Walpole. His story, like the genre he helped create, is full of surprises, twists, and turns that will leave you wanting more.
And who knows, you might even be inspired to build your own castle in the sky. Until next time, keep diving deep.